To order. Welcome to meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that masks be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizers in the room. Please refrain from coming into the room if you are symptomatic. A reminder to all the members of the committee and the witnesses that all comments should be addressed through the chair when you are not speaking. Your mic should be on mute and your camera must be on if you are participating virtually. Today we are here to study the main estimates 2022-23 and to receive an update on application backlogs as requested by the committee. I would like to welcome the Minister for appearing before this committee. He will be here with us for the 2 hours, and thanks a lot to the officials also who have joined him. Today, we are joined by Minister Honorable Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and also officials from the Department of Citizenship and Immigration. We are joined by Carolyn Xavier, Acting Deputy Minister, Marianne Campbell-Jarvis, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic and Program Policy, Daniel Mills, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Operations, Catherine Scott, Assistant Deputy Minister, Settlement and Integration, and as well as Hugh St. Pierre, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister, Finance, Security and Administration Sector. So thank you, Minister and officials. I would welcome you, and you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Get to show up, and I really appreciate the conversations we have at this committee. It's good to be here again this time to present details of the 2022-23 main estimates for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada.
The IRCC is pleased to work with the committee with respect to protection of refugees and for the visa applications. We continue to present Canada as a chosen destination, and we are qualified to be able to. We are a country where we're working to and determined to be able to help internationally.
We plan to continue our efforts to attract record numbers of skilled workers to help our economic recovery from the pandemic. In addition, we're going to continue to prioritize family reunification and offering shelter to the world's most vulnerable. In support of these commitments, these main estimates that we are discussing today reflect a total funding of $3.9 billion. This represents a net increase of $654.4 million compared to last year's main estimates. The most significant additional allocation in the main estimates is $208.8 million for the implementation of the multi-year immigration levels plan. To ensure that Canada has the workers that it needs to grow our economy and address our labour shortages, our immigration levels plan aims to continue welcoming an increased number of newcomers in order to continue our recovery from the pandemic. Specifically, the additional funding will allow us to resettle totals of 431,645 permanent residents in 2022, and next year 447,055 new permanent residents. Ce plan s'appuie sur les précédents.
This will be setting a precedent, and we have a priority to be able to have an economic recovery following the pandemic. We also resolved to be able to go ahead with humanitarian activities, and we have 40,000 Afghan refugees that will be coming.
I'll call Canada home, and we're going to continue working with our partners in the region and use all other means available to secure safe passage for those aiming to leave Afghanistan and for onward travel to Canada. To support this undertaking, the main estimates contain $106.2 million to support the Afghan resettlement commitment. They also include $83.5 million for the interim federal health program. As you know, Madam Chair, this program provides temporary health coverage to resettled refugees, asylum seekers, and other groups until they're eligible for provincial or territorial health care plans. These main estimates contain $173 million for the interim housing assistance program. Ce programme offre un soutien financier.
This program offers financial support in an extraordinary fashion with housing, temporary housing for people because of the pandemic. And we've been able to give asylum to people over the last few years.
Our government's building a modern immigration system that will position Canada to compete on the global stage for the world's best talent. We're already the top destination of choice globally for workers who'd like to resettle in another country, and we have to make sure our system allows us to take advantage of that fact. To proceed with building a new modernized and digital and data-driven immigration system, the main estimates also include $33.1 million. As we further adapt our processes to new technology, IRCC continues to explore more options to uphold and improve our client services. Therefore, to support our Client Support Centre, $22.1 million is included in these main estimates. Madame la Présidente, il s'agit de...
Madam Chair, these are important allocations for the budget.
Immigration system that supports our economic recovery, addresses our labour shortage, meets the needs of newcomers, and serves the interests of communities across Canada. The main estimates we're presenting will help us achieve this. Encore une fois, je remercie.
Once again, I would like to thank the committee for having given me the opportunity to express myself before you.
That you may have. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin our first round with Mr. Hallen. Mr. Hallen, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First and foremost, thank you to the officials for being here. Thank you for all you do. I'll say it was a pleasure to tour Europe with the Minister and especially with Mr. Mills. Thank you again, officials, for everything that you're doing. Right off the bat, I'd like to have the Minister and the officials, if they can provide documents or table to this committee a few things. From testimony that we heard from the Defense Department at the Afghan Committee, one, the number of Afghan cases referred to IRCC by GAC and DND, the number of cases out of those cases, how many are currently in process. Third, the number of those cases that IRCC has made a decision on, whether approved or refused, and if they're refused, the reason for refusal. And lastly, how many of those cases were withdrawn?
Good morning.
So if we can please have those tabled as soon as possible to the committee. Minister, with the interpreters, we've had many concerns about, they've brought up concerns about their families sometimes being, whether they're in Afghanistan or outside, being treated as security threats. And one of the number of people referred by DND or GAC or who have applications in the CIMM for Afghans who work for the Canadian government and their families who have applied for the program, do you know how many have been labeled or identified as security threats to Canada after you've gotten their application from GAC or DND?
So first, I have some information on your first question. Maybe I'll summarize that and then address your second point. And I do think there was potentially some misunderstanding in terms of the difference between principal applicants who may have been referred by different departments and the total number of people who are coming. With respect to DND, there are actually 3,470 people who've been referred through DND that are in Canada already. Just shy of 3,000 additional people who've been referred by DND that are approved to come to Canada, some of whom might still be in Afghanistan.
We were told that there was actually 3,800 that were approved by DND, and only 900 have come to Canada, according to DND. But I mean, I guess because they're short in time, if we can have those things tabled, I think we can go from there. But off the top of your head, were there any that were identified by DND or by GAC that were labeled as security threats afterwards?
So I don't know of the specific individuals who've been labeled as security threats. If you won't be approved to come to Canada, so it's hard to understand in which category you're talking about, because if you don't pass the biometrics assessment, you won't be approved to come on. But I will get you a summary of the number of people who are in Canada, the number of people who've been approved as well. We can provide that information.
Yeah,
I do want to address your second point because it's really important about the interpreters. There's not an internally held view that there is a class of people that have served Canada that pose a security threat to our national interest. To the extent that anyone holds that view on anything that I have said, I want to make absolutely clear that is just not the case. We do have a robust security screening and process that helps confirm people's identities and screen that sort of thing. But to the people who've served Canada as interpreters or otherwise, please know that is not my view, nor is it the Government of Canada's.
Okay. If the officials can just confirm those items will be tabled, I think if we can get one of the officials just to okay that. Mr. Mills or anyone?
Madam Chair, I can attest that we will make whatever information we have available as per the request of the member.
Okay, thank you. Minister, it's been almost 12 weeks since I asked the question about visa-free travel for Ukrainians. We passed, obviously without the support of the Liberals, in this committee for visa-free travel, and even in the House of Commons, it was passed for visa-free travel for Ukrainians. You had roughly almost 12 weeks ago said it would take 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks, to set that program up. Is that something that you've tried to start, or is that something that would be considered because it was passed in the House of Commons in this committee and it's been almost 12 weeks now?
We made a decision not to proceed with visa-free travel on our Ukraine program and instead put in place the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel. From my perspective, the program's actually working very, very well. We did pair off the vast majority of criteria that would normally lead to a finding of inadmissibility, with the exception of biometrics, and you had the opportunity during our trip to travel to Warsaw, where you saw the new biometrics collection facility. When we were there, we saw people were in and out in less than 10 minutes in most cases. Our capacity to process people exceeds the demand that's being put onto the system, so the numbers in the inventory will continue to come down if that remains the case. This has not proved to be a barrier for people to access the program, maybe in the first early weeks, but right now it seems to be moving quite well, with more than 100,000 people approved. But we've made a decision to stick to the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel rather than enter into a visa-free travel regime in the middle of an armed conflict.
So we are hearing concerns that it's not about the process when we get there. Obviously, the biometrics takes not much time to do, but it's about getting the appointment. We're still hearing it takes weeks. It takes, people have to travel to get them done. Sometimes they're not in the best situation to go there. That's why we asked for this, and we continue to hear complaints about that. Can the minister and his department also table how many applications were refused or rejected after biometrics when it came to any type of security threat or something that was brought up?
We can provide a summary of the number of applications that have been received, the number of approvals that have been granted, and the number of refusals. I think we can do that. The specificity to an individual obviously would not be permissible, but as a category, I think we can provide those numbers.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. You can come back in the second round. We will now proceed to MP Ali. MP Ali, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being here. Through you, Madam Chair, to Minister. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your hard work dealing with the Afghan refugees and the Ukraine situation. I truly appreciate your hard work. My question to the Minister, through you, Madam Chair. I noticed from the estimates that operating expense for the 2022 and 2023 fiscal year for passport and citizenship is $566.7 million. But the fees paid by applicants represent about 66% of the amount. And so that the government is only required to cover 34% of that overall expense. Do the estimate takes the cost associated with the current surge into account?
So, look, I may have to seek a little bit of clarity from my officials on the specific budget line item that you're referring to. So rather than me provide information you might not be looking for, maybe if one of our officials on the line could could explain whether that takes into the current surge that we're seeing into account in this year's main estimates, and if you could clarify whether that includes the additional 500 staff that have been added for the purpose of processing passports as well. That might be helpful. Do we have that information?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can confirm that yes, we have put in the forecast that was expected for this fiscal year as part of the budget request. What I would have to confirm, and I'm seeing if my CFO will be able to confirm this, is whether or not it also took into consideration the additional funding related to the comment that our minister made.
Thank you. Minister, through Madam Chair, the 2022 or 2023 estimate calls for a 10 million increase in grants for the interim housing assistance program, a 15 million increase in grants for the settlement program, a 4 million increase in a grant for resettlement assistance program, and a 6 million increase in the grant of international migration capacity building program. Could the minister give us some insight into the nature of these grants and the impact of it, adding a total of 35 million to these grants?
Yeah, so this is an important thing to understand is these numbers are not arbitrary. They reflect an increased number of people who are coming to Canada through different channels. One of the things that's, I think, really helpful to keep in our minds is that although there's a short-term cost when you want to increase settlement supports for people who come, the long-term return is enormous to have more people who live in our communities, who work in our communities, who raise families in our communities. So the increase in spending that you'll see reflected in the main estimates are a direct result of the decisions that we've taken to bring more people to Canada. When it comes to the settlement categories. For something like the interim housing assistance program, that's the kind of thing that we work on, for example, in partnership with provincial governments that may be required to take on additional expenses as more people enter their particular province. So these numbers that you've cited are a direct reflection of the fact that our ambition and needs to have more people arrive in Canada continue to grow. And from my perspective, the short-term cost of making sure people are set up for success when they arrive is dwarfed by the long-term return that people provide after moving to and living in our communities.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to Minister, among the tens of thousands of Ukrainians we are expecting to seek refuge in Canada, there will be 1,000 of young people like the Ukrainian parliamentary intern in my office, who will want to continue their education in Canadian colleges and universities. They will not necessarily have the fund available to pay the level of tuition fee that Canadian residents pay, let alone the level of fee that international students are required to pay. There don't appear to be any full or partially funded scholarship for those who come here under the Canada-Ukraine Authorization of Emergency Travel. Have there been any discussion with the provincial governments about improving the situation of these students?
First of all, I had the opportunity to join for the celebration yesterday evening that welcomed, I believe, 41 Ukrainian interns, and every party in the House of Commons was represented. And it was one of the most moving things I've seen in a very long time when our new arrivals broke into the Ukrainian national anthem. And I just want to say thank you to all who were there. It is a moment in my life that I will hold with me for a very long time. With respect to those who wish to study, we made a decision early on that we would attach eligibility either for an open work permit or a study permit for those who come under the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel. I have not personally had conversations with provincial governments, though it may be as much on educational institutions as it will be on any level of government, to actually address the cost. I am of the view that those who come to study in our institutions make extraordinary economic and social and frankly cultural contributions to our communities. To the extent that there is an opportunity for us to explore possibilities, I'm open to it. We have not put in place a plan to address this, as it's quite atypical for the Immigration Department to engage in questions around scholarships, for example. But to the extent that we can look at what tools we have to make it easier for people to live, work, and study in Canada. I am extremely interested, both from a humanitarian point of view, to do the right thing to support people fleeing vulnerable circumstances, but I believe it's in our self-interest to support people who wish to make those kinds of contributions to our communities.
Okay, time is up. We will now proceed. Mr. Ali, time is up for you. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaep. Mr. Brunel Desaep, you will have the floor for 6 minutes. You can please move ahead.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. You're very available for our committee, and this is very much appreciated. Mr. Minister, these days we have seen that in Quebec there is a really important problem, which are the shootings in Quebec, in the metropolitan area, where day after day we see shootings, and this is by criminal gangs. And Mr. Minister, those shootings, we see that it's easy to buy a firearm today, and so organized crime can buy them at the corner store. We have had some information that has said that 1/4 of RCMP that work in Quebec, rather than dealing with arms trafficking, they're dealing with immigration issues. So when are you going to ensure that this type of pressure is given up? Thank you for the question. I am very much in agreement with the MP on the firearms issue and the problem of violence caused by firearms. And I hope you don't mind if I answer in English. Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that I think is important is when we look at the reason that RCMP officers may be engaged, and I'll be careful not to dabble too much in the public safety minister's sandbox here. It's to enforce the laws that we have on the books. It's essential when we look at our domestic and international legal obligations that we don't ignore the responsibility we have to enforce those laws. I expect what you're getting to is the engagement of the RCMP who may be involved with processing people who've crossed the border and claimed asylum. What's important to realize is that if we don't have people set up to process people as they come across.
Okay, excusez-moi, Madame la Présidente.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I think that the Minister is aware that I only have 6 minutes, so his answer is a bit too long. But what I'm asking is a question. It's not complicated. When will we suspend the activities? Right now, there are RCMP officers that, rather than doing their work to work against arms trafficking and China, they're at the Roxanne road, and that needs to be closed. You know that. We know the Prime Minister said yesterday that we're discussing things with the state to modernize the agreement. But what I've heard is information that things are at a standstill, and that's the responsibility of your government. It's very, Chemin Roxanne, there's a problem, and you have firearms that are coming in, and the people right now are dying, and there are criminal gangs that are really using that space. So what are you waiting to suspend this third-party country agreement?
Well, one of the issues that I have with the argument that you've laid out is that there's a real challenge. You've suggested to sort of just close things down, and I don't know if that means you would put a structure in the way.
No, Monsieur le Ministre.
No, Mr. Minister, they make an application once you sign for this third country. The Acadia, the Association of the Immigration Lawyers, are asking you to do this because not only would it be easier for the RCMP, but it would be easier for the government of Quebec, where they have a limited capacity to welcome people, asylum claimants, and that they're coming through the back door.
Your point of view, but I think you may be ignoring one of the series of problems that approach would create. The border with the United States is very long, and there are many other points where a person could simply enter. There are fields all along the border that a person could move through.
Monsieur le Ministre, l'attente sur le CIMM.
Mr. Minister, This is Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
International qu'on avait déjà signé.
These are international agreements that have already been signed.
Just stop the clock. All the comments should be directed through the chair.
Oui.
So, and we should allow
Pardon,
the
Madame
minister
la
to
Présidente.
answer the question. So,
Oui, pardon.
like, I'll
C'est mon
start the
ami, en
clock
plus,
back
je
and
l'aime
you can go.
C'est mon ami.
Yes, I'm sorry. He's a friend of mine, so I like him a lot. So before, you had an agreement on the third-party countries that there were international agreements that were negotiated, and people went through the official entry lines. So why was this suspended if everybody's saying that the problem is that agreement, and it hasn't been suspended, of course, except for your government, of course.
Look, if you even speak to the UNHCR, they would still insist that the principle of safe third country is really important. When you're looking at humanitarian resettlement and asylum seekers, it's important that we provide venues, regular venues, for people to seek refuge and protection from violence that they're fleeing. But it's not the same thing as an ordinary, say, economic immigration program where a person will be able to say, this is the country I'd like to come to. It's a different stream of immigration altogether. The circumstance that you've just laid out would potentially create a circumstance where it would become an unmanageable volume of people who would be seeking to come in for the purpose of seeking asylum. And I don't think that's the best or most effective way to actually manage the situation. I also think if you, without putting the proper thought into place, sorry, I see you're trying to jump in.
Monsieur le ministre, est-ce que...
Mr. Minister, are you trying to tell me that that's not unmanageable agreement?
Très bien.
Well, Madam Chair, in the 10 seconds maybe I'll take, I think everyone will acknowledge that there needs to be improvements to the situation, and we work to both with the provincial government of Quebec to make sure that we can help cover the cost of housing and health care for people who come across. Just one moment, and also to reach a long-term solution with the United States that actually improves the situation on a go-forward basis. These are things that we're engaged with and will continue to work on.
For the interruption, time is up. Just before we go to the next member, just a reminder to all the members and the witnesses, all the questions should be directed through the chair. And once you ask the question, please give an opportunity to the witnesses to answer that question. So and only one person should speak at a time. Okay, so we will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for coming back to our committee and to his officials as well. I'm getting increasingly worried for the fact that I think IRCC system is overwhelmed and unable to cope with the situation. GAC had referred files to IRCC, Afghan files, and it appears that they are lost in the system. Afghan lawyers who worked with the Canadian Embassy have referred 28 files to IRCC. To date, they have not received a response from IRCC, no invitation, no G numbers. And representatives following this case just contacted IRCC last week around this, and they were told that they need to ask GAC to resubmit those referrals. That was from IRCC officials. Why is IRCC asking GAC to resubmit these applications? Are they lost in the system?
Thanks for the question, and no, I don't have any reason to believe that any files are lost in the system. I think, and look, without speaking to the specifics of individual cases, I think there's an issue that you're hitting on that I can try my best to provide some clarity on. Prior to the last federal election, we had made a decision to resettle 20,000 Afghan refugees. Subsequently, we campaigned on a commitment to increase that number to 40,000. And look, I bear with me for 30 seconds. There have been a significant number beyond the 20,000 who've now been formally brought into the process. The total of that 40,000 spaces is not yet filled, and that will be filled after we get these referrals from folks. I expect that everyone who will be brought into the program or who's reached out and will not be brought into the program will have an answer in a very short period of time, I'm guessing in the next few weeks. And I did have the opportunity to speak with a representative of the group that you've referred to just a few days ago. So I anticipate that within a matter of weeks there will be clarity for all of those who've reached out seeking to become part of the program.
Well, it troubles me for the very fact that IRCC has asked for those files to be resubmitted. And the minister says the files are not lost. If they're not lost, why is IRCC asking for those files to be resubmitted? We also just heard from the Department of National Defense that they submitted 3,800 files to IRCC by way of referrals. These are individuals, Afghans whose files have been verified by the Department of National Defense. And they advise that only 900 of them have been accepted. So what's happened to the other files? The minister says, don't worry, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. Meanwhile, media report is indicating that people are being tortured. Afghan interpreters, those with enduring relationships with Canada, are being captured by the Taliban and are being tortured. Every second of the day counts for the lives of these individuals. So I am absolutely astounded with the process here. And if the files are not misplaced or lost or somehow IRCC officials can't find them, why are they asking for them to be resubmitted?
So I share your perspective on the need to act in a substantial and urgent way. And I remind folks that we've now got actually, though I said 12,600, another plane arrived yesterday, and there's approximately 12,900 people who are here. There is another plane.
Sorry, Minister, I don't need those numbers. I need you to answer the question, please.
1% at a time.
Because this is really important. There are people coming through the special immigration measures that are landing here tomorrow as well. There's going to be more flights more or less every week. Yes, there are people who may have made a contribution that we're going to continue to bring here. But in terms of DND referrals, there are 3,470 people who are in Canada now under the special immigration streams that came from DND. There's another 2,956 who've been approved. The total number of CIMMs who are actually
Sorry, I'm going to
Canada.
interrupt the minister for a second here. Saying how many people have come versus how many applications is completely different. We know, for example, that the interpreters have submitted 300 applications. Former interpreters submitted 300 applications, total 5,000 people amongst those. So using those numbers do not actually answer the question. I'm sorry, Minister. Please, the answer that I'm looking for is why is IRCC asking people to resubmit the files if they're not lost? If the minister can't answer that question, I ask him to ponder it and submit an answer to the committee, because I don't want to hear numbers again. I need to get on with my next question. In terms of discrepancy in treatment, I have a file in a situation where people asked UNHCR for a referral. That was back in March, and they got an appointment in June 14th. They told UNHCR that they cannot wait because the visa would expire in Pakistan. Meanwhile, similar case went directly to the High Commission of Canada, and they got processed. How is it possible that there could be discrepancy to this magnitude in the treatment of files?
One of the things that's a real challenge when we're dealing with our refugee resettlement initiatives is when we rely on referral partners, sometimes they're facing unique pressures that are beyond the control of the Government of Canada. So UNHCR's capacity, if I go back to the timelines that you were talking about in the region, we're only starting to ramp up around the end of the first quarter of this particular year. So depending on where a person goes, which referral partner they've used, the timelines that those third parties are working with can vary significantly.
Well, then why is the government on the website telling people to go to UNHCR for a referral? Instead, they could actually have gone to the High Commission for a much quicker turnaround. Why don't they put on the website to tell people to go to the High Commission?
Well, there's a number of different referral partners that we work with, and UNHCR has referred millions of people and given refugee status determination around the world and in the region. We have a number of different partners that we work with, and depending on which stream you're coming through and your potential eligibility, who you go to may vary based on the nature of why you would be a qualified applicant for Canada's Afghan refugee resettlement programs.
I can tell the minister UNHCR's response to that family is not my problem when your visa expires beyond the date that they can get the appointment.
Ms. Kwan, time is up. I know as members of parliament, we hear very heartbreaking stories in our constituency offices. I know a lot of people are going through a lot, but we have to be mindful that we are respectful to our witnesses and let's work together. So now we will go to our second round, and we will start that with Mr. Redekop for 5 minutes. Mr. Redekop, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister and all the witnesses for being here. Minister, Chapter 18 of the House and Commons Procedure and Practice lays out the rules about the financial cycle and the main estimates. And it says that members have the right to have its grievances addressed before approving the requirements of the Crown. So as you're probably aware, one of the grievances that I have deals with immigration, refugee citizenship, Canada, operations and leadership, relating to your Associate Deputy Minister on the production of papers motion that we have that's before IRCC. And as you're likely aware, there's some issues with redactions and documents that were finally sent over just yesterday, but there were still 2 documents that have redactions that we have not been able to see. And so when Madam Xavier was here at the committee last week, she was somewhat dismissive about the absolute constitutional authority of the House of Commons to send for documents. Indeed, she actually said that the IRCC was able, through client solicitor privilege, to redact documents, which I don't believe is true. And so I guess my question for you is that, bearing in mind that you're also a member of Parliament, of the House of Commons, and not just a minister, do you agree with your deputy that IRCC has the authority to override the House of Commons constitutional authority and withhold information from this committee?
Look, before I address your question, I want to address Madam Chair's comments before. Let me just say I don't view any of the questions that I've been asked to be disrespectful, and I think if people bring passion and energy to their questions based on things they really care about, that's appropriate, and I don't mind difficult questions. It's my job to be here and take them. With respect to Mr. Redekop's question about the issues around document production and procedure, I think it's for this committee to make decisions about the needs of this committee to do its work. I have been through a similar issue on separate committees before I was a minister, and there is a natural tension that sometimes requires committees to sort things out over time between the laws that bind civil servants and the parliamentary procedures that parliamentarians agree to. I've spoken with quite a number of people over the last number of years that have differing points of view on this particular question, and I think reasonable people can disagree.
So I guess the issue is the redactions are to be looked at by the law clerk, and so you're essentially saying, or your department, Madam Chair, is saying that we can't. You don't trust the law clerk to do the job, and that the official that the department is going to do the redactions, and that's what I'm asking you. Is that, do you agree with your department on that is the right way to go?
I don't think it's for me as the minister to proclaim on a dispute on procedure that's before this committee. I think it's for members of this committee.
Another question then. So the production of papers motion asked for documents, and it specifically asked for all briefing notes, memos, and emails from senior officials. And there were, I've gone through all the batches that were distributed, and there was one little document that had a few emails in it, but the rest of it there were no other emails. There were other documents and things, and you have 9,000 people in your department with hundreds of managers. And can you honestly tell me that beside the very few that went to the deputy minister, these few emails, that 0 emails have been exchanged between managers on the subject of racism in the department? There were lots of fancy presentations made. With COVID, everybody's working remotely. I find it difficult to believe that there were no emails that should have been released in this production of papers.
Look, I think you'll appreciate with a department as large as the one that I'm responsible for, I don't have a line of sight into the specific email exchanges between people who work in the department. I think what's important is I do have full faith in the officials' ability to review and comply with the instructions that would be included in document production requests. But I think what's important is to understand the process that was employed. So I can't speak from a place of personal knowledge about those individual emails that you're referring to.
Do you think it's reasonable to assume that there probably were some emails?
I think it's important that I don't make assumptions. I wasn't copied on those emails. I don't know what they would have been, and I do have faith my officials would not be trying to not share them for any.
I want to change gears a little bit
purpose.
to the visitors and international students. There was a motion M44 yesterday talking about the international people that are coming in here, and there's people that are having horror stories, and I specifically want to talk about the caretaker program. Madam Xavier told me that this is a priority for your department, yet it doesn't seem to be that way. And so my question is, if it is a priority, the numbers in your report show that it is not being successful. How do you account for that?
Sorry, can you just provide clarity? You started with international students and then referred to caretakers, and there's a number, if you were referring to caregivers, there's about 6 different programs that have existed in the last couple of years. Can you just...
Yeah, I was referring to the $267 million for visitors, international students, and temporary workers, and I wanted to focus on caregivers in that category.
Time is up. We'll get an opportunity.
I'd maybe invite Mr. Redekop to that. I don't feel I took up some of the time. If he wants to send a question through the committee afterwards, I could provide an answer in writing.
Okay. We will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I want to thank the Honourable Minister for being with us today and staying for the full 2 hours. Madam Chair, from the work that we get in our offices, this immigration file is not the easy one. This is probably one of the most tedious and difficult file. And I want to thank the honorable, respected officials that have joined and the staff at the IRCC, the work that they do to serve Canadians every day. And I would also like to echo the comments made by Honourable Member Mr. Bruno Duceppe that Minister has been very accessible to this committee, and it shows from the number of appearances that he have made. And Madam Chair, I also want to thank the Minister for his recent visit to my riding of Surrey Newton and for hearing and responding to many questions and concerns from those at the grassroots level. Minister's hard work and advocacy are much appreciated, and I look forward hosting him back in Surrey again sometime very soon on. But my question to the Minister, Madam Chair, through you, on April 22nd, the Honourable Minister made an announcement that express entry draws for the federal skilled workers and Canadian experience class candidates are set to resume in early July. With Canada having a low unemployment rate, high number of vacancies, an aging population, and low birth rate, could the Honourable Minister please touch on the importance of reopening the country to qualified skilled workers?
Thanks. Very generous of you with your comments. Unnecessary, but I appreciate it nevertheless. So immigration is an economic portfolio in addition to being a humanitarian portfolio. And it's never been more important in my view than it is today that we embrace immigration as an economic growth strategy. I look at the extraordinary economic recovery that we're living through from COVID-19 right now, and despite the fact that we've seen record job growth, the lowest unemployment rate since we started keeping track of those statistics. Before the Omicron variant hit us at the end of the year, there was 965,000 jobs available in Canada. We cannot fill those jobs with a domestic labor force, and if we want to maximize our economic potential as a country to pay for all the things that we enjoy, we need to bring more people into that workforce to kickstart even more economic growth. The announcement that you referred to included an additional component as well, which was the extension of postgraduate work permits for people who had recently expired or soon to be expired postgraduate work permits, so they'll be able to continue to stay and work in Canada. With respect to the resumption of the draws for the Canadian Experience Class and Federal Skilled Worker Stream, this is really important. There was a significant pause as a result of the decision that was taken during the pandemic not to be processing certain streams as we were trying to deal with a closed border to protect the public from the spread of COVID-19, and it put real pressures on the system. And I recognize some of these people may have been in Canada and may have been eligible for the TR to PR program instead, for example. But the advantage to that pause is about to reveal itself in a very positive way. When we resume the draws in July, we're also going to be back to the ordinary service standard rather than having an unpredictable amount of time before a person will be resettled as a permanent resident. Getting back to a reasonable volume and reasonable processing times is not just good to give peace of mind to the applicant, but certainty to potential employers as well as to when their new highly skilled talent is going to arrive at the workplace. This is going to make a very big difference and is going to allow thousands and thousands of people to come and make a contribution to our communities.
Madam Chair, the Minister has also made some policy changes to the program that is TR to PR stream as well. Could Minister elaborate how it will help those 90,000 individuals that has applied under TR to PR stream?
Yeah, so look, you're testing my memory a little bit. I didn't go over my notes from this particular announcement immediately before I showed up. People who came through the TR to PR program and are fully resettled as permanent residents are here and don't need further support. There were certain restrictions on the TR to PR program that pre-existed my time as minister, including restrictions on their ability to travel and the ability of their family members to apply from overseas. By making changes to those programs, we're going to make life a little bit easier for people that we recognize might still be in the process for a period of time, and that will free them up to have opportunities to perhaps travel or have more flexibility in having family members join them. This is an important...
Mr.
Sorry.
Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Mr. Dhaliwal.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaep for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Brunel Desaep, please. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have much time, but I also like you very much and have a lot of respect for you. Mr. Minister, do you feel that it's acceptable that 1/4 of the RCMP officers in Quebec are at Roxanne and managing that situation rather than dealing with arms trafficking at the border?
I think you're pitching an argument that I fundamentally disagree with the pretense that you've laid out. The proportion of the force that's dealing with one issue versus another is not the problem. Are there adequate resources to deal with all of the challenges that a particular community faces? That's the challenge for me. And do I think it's acceptable that there is gun violence in Canada?
No, c'est pas ça la question.
No.
That's not the question.
Pretense that underlines your question.
Non, pas du tout.
No, not at all. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but this is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm talking about at the Chemin Roxanne, we have this Safe Third Country agreement. We would be able to do things. We should be able to do things better. So, it's not your field to the firearms, but the government needs to be aware that this agreement, the third party, needs to be suspended to modernize it, because the Prime Minister said yesterday there were negotiations with the United States to modernize the agreement. Mr. Minister, where are we at with that negotiation? How much time do you think before we have a deal? Because now I think it's urgent.
Look, I'm not in a place to reveal bilateral discussions with the United States. Suffice it to say that we have discussions with our American partners on the Safe Third Country Agreement, but there is not a specific date that I've got lined up where everything's going to be complete. It's a mandate letter commitment that I have to work with the United States to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement, but there's not an established date where everything will be complete. It's something we need to continue to work on.
Je comprends qu'il y a des négociations.
I understand that there are negotiations and that things are confidential, but I'm not asking for the contents of the negotiations. What I'm asking is that you're at least able, some people are waiting for this news. Can you at least tell us how much time you expect before this agreement will be modernized?
There's not a declared timeline that I can point to say it's only going to be this amount of time. What I can reassure people is we're going to continue to work with our provincial counterparts on things like housing, on things like healthcare, on things like improving our asylum system, while we continue to work towards.
Donc c'est pas une priorité pour votre gouvernement. Merci.
So it's not a priority for your government. Thank you.
We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minister has said that it's wrong to separate families, yet this is exactly what's happening. I have an Afghan family, a former Afghan interpreter who's been left behind. His brother has been left behind. All the paperwork has been done. I wrote to the minister about this back in March 30th to be exact, and he's referred to his staff. And as the weeks pass, the IRCC staff still can't even find the file on this situation. They're saying that they're looking for the file and waiting for officials to send it to them. So just how long does it take within IRCC to get files so they can follow up on cases?
Thank you. And the answer, depends on an individual case file because we don't yet have, and this is something I very much want to change in the years ahead, we don't yet have a completely digital system where you can search a database from start to finish and simply pull up a file. We have, and in many ways, a paper-based system that can be antiquated in certain elements that can require us to have to reach out to offices on the other side of the world that may actually have to dig out paper applications that have been submitted who can then relay information back. This is something that I desperately want to change because in the 21st century we need a 21st immigration system. The investments have already been made, the work is underway, but in terms of how long it takes, it depends on the facts of an individual given file.
Minister, this request was made at the end of March. It is now mid-May. And staff have just come back to say we're looking for the file. And of course, with all the other applications with Afghan individuals, they were actually sent an email to the officials, right? So it is actually in the system somewhere. So it's not a paper file, that is for certain. So, I hope the minister understands the gravity of the situation and the discrepancy of how things are being dealt with. And it seems to me that files cannot be found. Most certainly not in an expeditious manner, let alone trying to process it in an expeditious manner, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Minister, now I have brought to the minister a request through this committee, a budget breakdown of the $85 million back in February. And I got a response back in this binder of nothingness that says there's no such information that could be provided. Detailed planning associated costing is currently taking place. So does the minister actually have that detailed planning that he can table to the committee now?
Do I have the liberty to provide an answer?
If you can give a quick answer.
Okay, so every budget line item is not fully established. To be very quick, the areas that $85 million are going towards are study permits, work permits, TRVs, proof of citizenship, and reducing the PR card inventories. But in order to address the specific budget line items, there's still a certain amount of work to allocate how much money goes to each of those 5 lines of business.
Thank you, Minister. We will now end our second round and this panel with 2.5 minutes for Mr. Redekop and then 2.5 minutes for Mr. Alcoy. Okay, Mr.
We have 5?
Because we have, this panel ends, then we have to go into the second panel. So, and we have to vote.
We have time for 5 minutes.
Then the second panel will be shorter. So we have to vote after we end this panel, and then Minister will give opening remarks for 5 minutes for the backlog issue, and then we will go into round of questioning. So you will have 2.5 minutes now.
Thank you, Minister. So on the issue of...
sorry, on the point of order there, Madam Chair. If we have to vote on this, then we need to do that in this first panel. And the next panel should not be cut short. We should have the full hour for the next panel.
That's what I said, that we will, after 2.5 minutes and 2.5 minutes, we will vote and then proceed to the second panel. Yeah, please, Mr. Janis, go ahead.
Minister, on the issue of Hong Kong, it's been devastating to see recent events out of Hong Kong, the arrest of 90-year-old retired Cardinal Joseph Zen, as well as Canadian citizen Denise Ho, well-known singer-songwriter, and various others. I'd appreciate your comments on these arrests and also recognition that there are significant concerns persisting about the immigration measures that are in place for Hong Kong. The special measures don't apply to human rights defenders and pro-democracy activists who don't meet certain economic criteria. The programs look more like they're constructed with economic objectives in mind instead of to really target human rights defenders. Another concern about these measures is that they exempt criminal charges under the national security law from consideration, but they do not exempt from consideration criminal charges related to pro-democracy activism that were made under other laws. There are people that were charged under laws other than the national security law for legitimate pro-democracy activism who have had challenges being able to access the Canadian immigration system. So are you contemplating further changes to the special immigration measures around Hong Kong to address those specific problems that I've identified?
So the challenges that you've described are twofold, as I understand it. One is potentially more of an economic than humanitarian focus. The second is the breadth with which the exemptions for the national security law apply, where it could be more broadly applied to pro-democracy activities. On the first question, I'm not as concerned that the challenge is there because of the nature of the more widely available travel that people from Hong Kong have to Canada. Because we don't have an ordinary visa regime, we have the electronic travel authorization, which allows people more freely to enter Canada regardless of the purpose of the travel. On the second question, I'd be interested if this committee has feedback. My personal view is that if we're dealing with activities that have been criminalized by a regime with whom we may have many points of disagreement, and if those criminal charges don't reflect reprehensible behavior in our view, or certainly criminal activity in our view, then I would be interested in recommendations this committee may have.
Thank you. So just back to the first point, the issue is that we're excluding people that have been prominent pro-democracy protesters and activists if they're, for instance, high school students, if they're not yet graduates. Why would we exclude human rights defenders who are clearly should be able to come to Canada based on the principles of these programs, and yet aren't formally graduates yet?
Time is up, Minister, so we will have to move to Mr. Al-Khoury.
Thank you. Get a response in writing, at least.
Mr. Al-Khoury, you will have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madame la Présidente. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for coming to talk to us.
Regarding the violence in our streets, Mr. Minister, part of that happened in my riding, but it must be known to everyone that a good part of responsibility also go to the provincial police of each area, not only everything on the federal. Maintenant, ma question pour vous, Monsieur le Ministre.
My question for you, Mr. Minister. Many programs and grants have important increases. Are you able to describe the main measures that have been taken with respect to the former years, first? And B, are there new tools for the pilot program for 2020, 2022, 2023, where you would like to draw the attention of this committee to those activities? So can you tell us how the budget for 2022-2023 is going to take into consideration the link between economic growth and immigration? Thank you, Minister.
Okay, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. This is a very important function of the committee to consider the measures within the estimates. It's difficult with the interpretation coming into my ear. But when the funds increased, this is because of government decisions to increase the number of new arrivals. So it's essential for me to promote the national interest to increase newcomers for the economy, economic growth. And so it's essential to improve the quality of the economy.
Have to be increase the margin by which we are excellent compared to competitor economies. The increase in the numbers that you see in the estimates are a reflection of the decisions that we've taken to bring more people here to fill gaps in the economy so we can experience economic growth. There was one piece I was a little bit unclear on the second element to your question. You mentioned a pilot program. Was there a specific pilot or just generally funding?
In 2022, 2020, that you would like to express, or any idea?
Sorry for interrupting,
Many I'd
Mr.
like to. We're out of time, I see. And,
if you can give a quick, 10-second thing.
I'm very excited about new flexibilities we're going to be pursuing in the express entry system, which is going to allow us to, with more precision, target workers to fill gaps in key sectors than is possible under the current system. I have much more to say, but maybe on my next committee appearance.
Okay. So with that, we end our round of questioning, and we have to vote on the main estimates 2022-2023, and then we will start our second panel. So shall vote 1 under Department of Citizenship and Immigration carry?
On division.
On division. Carried. Shall vote 5 under Department of Citizenship and Immigration carry?
On division.
On division. Carried. Shall vote 10 under Department of Citizenship and Immigration carry?
On division.
Carried. On division. Shall vote 1 under Immigration and Refugee Board carry?
On division.
Carried. On division. Shall I report, as the chair, shall I report the votes on the main estimates to the House?
On division.
Yes. So, thank you. And we will now suspend the meeting for 2 minutes and then go into second round, second panel, and then we will have opening remarks. Meeting to order. I would like to thank the Minister once again for appearing before the committee, and this panel will be for the applications backlog and processing times. Minister, I would like you to provide your opening remarks for 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Merci, Madame la Présidente. I'd like to
Thank you, Madam Chair.
to address the issue of application inventories and processing times at IRCC. My view, I think people will appreciate, is that immigration is critical to the well-being of our communities, and that newcomers play an essential role in addressing some of our most severe labor shortages throughout the pandemic and as we enter the economic recovery phase. The past 2 years have posed real challenges that would have been beyond imagining just a couple of years ago, and immigration systems around the world have been affected by the pandemic as a result of lengthy border closures, travel restrictions, and public health measures that have prevented people from going to work, particularly in jurisdictions where they may not have been able to adjust to work from home as easily as they have in Canada, depending on your line of work. Nous avons continué à recevoir.
We have continued to receive applications leading to frustrating delays and substantial file backlogs. My department is working hard to resolve these issues. We have made great efforts to mitigate the effects of these difficulties, partly through digital solutions and program innovations.
Refugees and Citizenship Canada has modernized its processes by increasing the digitization of files, offering online intake for many lines of business, and allowing for greater remote processing of applications despite office closures that did force staff to work remotely where that was an option. As a result, and in spite of the global pandemic, IRCC has made over 500,000 decisions and welcomed over 405,000 new permanent residents in 2021, which is the greatest number of newcomers in a single year in Canada's history. Cela a été rendu possible.
This was possible in part because we established a pathway to permanent residency for people who were here in Canada on a temporary status, including temporary foreign workers, students, and others making a positive contribution to Canada's economy.
In the midst of the pandemic, we made a decision to step up with a significant contribution on the world stage to accept at least 40,000 Afghan refugees, as well as tens of thousands of Ukrainians. In spite of this increasingly large and complex workload, we are seeing that we're able to reach some pretty important goals. Already, IRCC has surpassed its goal to make 147,000 permanent residents' final decisions in the first quarter of 2022, which is double the number during the same period of time in 2021. In fact, from January to the end of March, we made over 156,000 final decisions on permanent residence applications, which puts us on a pace where our ambitious goal this year is well within reach. To respond to the pressures resulting from the pandemic and to support Canada's economic recovery that will help us address our labour shortage, we're investing an additional $85 million to help reduce application inventories that were accumulated during the pandemic and to increase staff across the department. Il s'agit notamment de demandes d'étudiants.
This includes applications from international students, workers, and visitors, as well as for permanent resident card renewals and citizenship ceremonies.
Beginning in mid-June, Canada will extend postgraduate work permits for recent international graduates. Those whose permits have already expired or will expire this year will be eligible for an additional open work permit of 18 months. As well, in July of this year, we'll be ending the temporary pause on express entry draws and resume inviting qualified candidates to apply for permanent residence. Across Canada, processing is going to continue for all of our programs with 100% of IRCC offices and service providers open. Capacity limits continue to require the majority of staff to work remotely, but it's not stopping processing or our ability to address the inventory of cases that have built up. Of our missions overseas, 98% are open. As well, 97% of our visa application centres are open and offering biometrics collection, and 98% of our panel physicians clinics are open and offering immigration medical exams. Mais il reste certainement beaucoup de travail.
But clearly, there's a lot more work to do. Addressing a backlog of applications is not simply a question of numbers or resources. It's a human challenge.
Represents a person whose life is in some ways on hold or has been impacted. I know that, and our department is also very aware of the real-life impact that the challenges our immigration system faces can have on individuals and families. My view is that we have a duty to resolve these challenges, to do right by those who have hopes of making a new life in Canada, and to help to continue to recover from the pandemic. We're committed to helping resolve these challenges by making the necessary investments to address these challenges that are serious, but are the result of a temporary and exogenous shock to the immigration system. Merci du temps que vous.
Thank you for this time.
I'll be pleased to answer the committee's questions with the final comment that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the output of our immigration system remains extraordinary. The user experience can be very challenging. By making the kinds of investments that I've described, and some that I'm sure we'll get into in the question and answer period, I do believe that we can return back to pre-pandemic standards and have our immigration system on track to support the people who'd like to come to Canada, but as importantly, support the communities that they will call home after they arrive. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin that with the first round with Mr. Jennis for 6 minutes. Mr. Jennis, floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister. I think it's important to acknowledge that we do have a very serious problem with backlogs right now, and I infer from your remarks that acknowledgement of the problem, which is an important first step. I think part of solving the problem is not just say we're working on it, but to establish specific goals in terms of what is an acceptable wait time for people for specific categories, and to establish timelines in which you intend to realize those goals. So to say, for instance, the current wait times in many categories are clearly unacceptable and create significant hardship for people. So for you to be able to say, these are what acceptable wait times are, and we will seek to have our system working within those wait times within a certain period of time. Is it your intention to identify those goals and timelines and work towards them?
Yeah, and in fact, to go one step further, so the service standards for the different lines of business are what we identify as acceptable wait times, and it'll range based on what stream you're talking about. My goal is to get back to service standards. I think we'll be able to do it on a majority of lines of business, potentially this calendar year. And where we can't do it, we should be broadcasting those timelines. So on the announcement I made on January 31st about some of the investments we're making, we did broadcast some of those timelines. But the step further that I wanted to share with you is we also made the decision to broadcast where we're actually at and not just where the service standards are. Some people may say, hey, look, it's weird for the government to actually be publishing that they're beyond service standards, but I don't think there's a problem with acknowledging that. So we actually have posted publicly the actual processing times so people can see where we are at, where we should be. And if you'd like more details, I expect you'll want to get to your questions, but Dan Mills from our department would be able probably to each line of business tell you the anticipated timelines to get back to service standard.
Thank you. I would appreciate that information in writing if we can receive at the committee to know what the goals in terms of timelines for coming back to those service standards.
Are there specific lines of business you're most interested in?
I would like to see all of them. Personally, I'm particularly interested in refugees, the processing times around refugee sponsorship, but I think we'd be interested in seeing all of them. Another question for you, Minister, in a context where, as you've identified, a majority of staff involved in processing are working remotely, how many people involved in immigration processing are on unpaid leave as a result of their personal vaccination status?
I don't have that number. I'm not sure if any of our officials have that number in front of them.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I don't have the exact number, but from my recollection, I don't believe it's more than about 200 people out of our close to 11,000 employees who are not currently working with us due to the choice they've made on vaccination status.
Okay.
But I can get that number more accurately. I'm just guessing.
I think we'd appreciated it, and our view as a party is again, in a context where most of those folks are working from home especially, it would be an easy win for you to say, Minister, and obviously you have to consult with some of your other cabinet colleagues, but for the government to say, let's let these folks get back to work so that we can get people that are experienced working in processing back on the issue of processing. Could you maybe, if you want to respond to that point, but also address another issue, which is your department now limits the number of inquiries you'll respond to from MPs' offices, and our offices, our staff are working very hard and in many cases well over time to respond to the concerns that people have. And it is a major source of frustration that we're limited in the kinds of responses and level of responses that we get from the department. We're the front lines of serving people often, and so what's the rationale behind that limitation, and is there any willingness to revisit it?
I'm desperate to revisit it, but we need to make sure that we have the resources in place to allow the system to work. One of the things that I've struggled with, because I still run an MP's office too, and my staff run into the same challenges that other constituency staff raise to me through their members of parliament.
Their access to the minister, though.
You know what, though, we try very hard to make sure that we run our ship the same way that everybody else's does. But just, you hit on a really important point. One of the biggest challenges I have, to be completely frank with committee members, is realizing that it takes time to hire and train people and get them up to speed. We've received a lot of very serious investments that will help us reach these goals over time. In the short term, every person that I have do one thing is not doing another thing. The explosion of inquiries we've seen from MPs' offices over the last couple of years, and maybe if one of our staff could give the accurate number if they have them, has really hampered our ability to get back to people in a acceptable way in many instances. So we're trying to make decisions that will allow them to say, send us the biggest priority cases, and we'll do what we can to get to you as quickly as possible. If we have not a limit on 5 cases per day that MPs can send, but let's say it was 20, you can expect, unless other very serious changes are made.
Sorry, Minister, I understand. Just in the time I have left, I do want to comment that explosion is a function of another problem. In an ideal world, members of Parliament offices wouldn't need to be contacted because things would be handled in a satisfactory way. So we're not the problem. We're a symptom of another problem. But insofar as that problem exists, people need to go to their members of Parliament and seek their support and advocacy. And so shutting off that channel as well kind of compounds the problem and limits people's opportunity to receive additional advocacy when they experience problems. And it's very hard for us to identify what are and are not priority cases, to choose, whose marriage is more important than whose funeral,
Mr.
right?
Janice, time is up. We will now proceed.
I will want to revisit this because this is important, but I'll build it into a subsequent answer so I don't jeopardize other members' time.
Okay, we will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, a common and frequent concern that I'm hearing in regards to processing of permanent resident travel document. For example, in India, the current processing times are upwards of 4 months. For many without valid PR cards who have to travel abroad on a moment's notice or for an emergency situation, are then stuck outside Canada for a minimum of 4 months before having the opportunity to return home. This can particularly be very difficult for individuals when families are separated, with young families particularly, are those having to return to their respective employment duties. Could the minister touch on whether this is a matter that is on the IRCC's radar and something that the department hopes to address?
Thank you to the member. And maybe very briefly, because I view this issue to be related to the question that we received earlier. I agree with the prior member that it is not a problem in and of itself that MPs want to reach out to the minister's office. That is normal, and that's a necessary part of our system. It is a function of another problem that was caused by the closure of the border to protect the public from the spread of COVID-19, which caused us to pivot our strategy to resettle more people who are already in Canada rather than people who were in third countries, that built up the number of cases of people who wanted to come. At the same time, local offices around the world were sometimes shut down as a result of local public health measures, and we've also seen Canada become the world's destination of choice and the number of applications increase. All of this has put pressure on the system, including on the issues of PR cards, because we have a finite number of resources at a given point in time that we have to allocate in certain places. Now, to your question, the economic and fiscal update, the $85 million I referred to in my opening remarks, includes specifically funding that's going to go to reduce the inventories for PR card wait times. I know Mr. Mills is on the line with us. Dan, if you have the timelines that we expect to get back to a better service standard, would you be willing to share that with the committee?
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Donc,
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to permanent residence cards, the time for renewing of those cards, in December it was 120 days, and I'm very grateful to be able to say that now it's dropped to 65 days. So we've made huge progress, and we're going to continue to reduce the inventory so that we'll be able to get it underneath the 60 days as we're targeting.
Minister, Madam Chair, this is not what I asked the question to the Minister. This is about the PRTD, that the travel document that people require when this, with 6 months wait on the PR cards, families have to travel overseas. And particularly when it comes to India, I have seen families separated for 4 months just to get the PRTD, which we used to get within 2 weeks of time prior to the COVID situation. Even during the COVID situation, I can tell you the staff at the IRCC staff that was there in India was very helpful, and particularly the woman that's back in Vancouver now. But nowadays, 4 months is not acceptable to get that travel document. And I want to see what are some of the steps that IRCC is taking to deal with that.
Sure, and look, apologies if we didn't nail your question on the head. I think they're inextricably linked. To the extent that we can sort out PR card processing times, the need for the travel document won't be there. I feel badly that we've taken up more of your questioning time, so I'll offer to give you an answer in writing. And if you would like to continue with your questioning in the time that you have, I'd be happy to allow that.
Minister, I also chair the Special Committee on Afghanistan, and we have heard heart-wrenching testimony over the past many months regarding the plight of Afghans trying to flee the country and hoping to begin a new life here in Canada. In recent weeks, we have seen an increase in Afghan refugees arriving in Canada, and it's my understanding there are about 12,000 individuals that have put their foot on the Canadian soil. Could the Minister please touch on the work the department has done recently to ramp up the efforts in bringing Afghans to Canada, and touch on some of the difficulties in processing Afghan refugees compared to refugees coming from other parts of the globe?
Look, thank you very much, Mr. Dhaliwal. And during my recent appearance at the Afghan Committee, we went over some of those challenges in great detail that primarily relate to safe passage through and outside of Afghanistan for onward travel to Canada. One of the things that is really encouraging to me is the uptick on the pace of arrivals that we've seen very recently. In the month of April, we had approximately 2,500 Afghan refugees land in Canada in 1 month. Yesterday, we've seen just shy of 300 privately sponsored refugees arrive on a flight from Tajikistan. Tomorrow, we will have another flight with 330 CIMMs, those who've come through special immigration measures because of their service to Canada, will be arriving on a flight from Pakistan. It's really, really encouraging to see this uptick in the pace of arrivals, because it gives me faith that we're going to be able to more quickly meet our goal to resettle the total of 40,000 we've committed to. There are still immense challenges on the ground. You can imagine the logistical concerns when you're dealing with a territory that has been seized by the Taliban, where you do not have access. But by working with international partners, we are continuing to identify, have people enter our program and to process them. And it's really, really a special thing when you have the opportunity to meet some of these now nearly 13,000 people who call Canada home.
Thank you, Minister. Time is up for Mr. Dhaliwal. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel-Desaep. Mr. Brunel-Desaep, floor is yours. You will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to continue on with the last question and the answer that was given with respect to the objective to be able to bring in 40,000 Afghan refugees by the end of the year. That's your objective. You said it, and you've repeated it to the Special Committee on Afghanistan, and I sit on that committee. So would it be possible, Madam Chair, and I would appreciate if the Minister could transmit a detailed plan to the committee for his forecast to the end of 2022 with respect to reaching his objective. It can be a table. I just want to see what type of pace the Minister expects to see reaching his objective. I haven't received anything yet, and I sit on the special committee. And the Minister says he is going to be able to meet his objective, but I'd like to know what would be the plan. And would it be possible to have access to that plan, Madam Chair?
Madame Présidente,
Madam Chair, just to clarify, to be able to welcome 40,000 over the next year. So this is 2022, 2023. Yes, right. But now, and just in English because it's this important.
It's there are certain folks that we'll have a little bit more predictability with, particularly when there are people who are approved in a third country. There are still some uncertainties for the people that we will not go back on our commitment to who are still in Afghanistan, because I don't want to sugarcoat things. It is really, really challenging to move people through Afghanistan, and the stories are the most heartbreaking things that I've ever had to work with or live through. No. The challenges are enormous, and if we can solve the safe passage concerns, we will have more predictability in the schedule by which we expect people to arrive. There are those certain groups for whom we have not yet unlocked the pathway to get them out of Afghanistan that may not be as predictable. So I can't give you exactly to a person month by month by month. I can give you trends. I can give you what's happened already. I can give you upcoming expected flights. There will be certain challenges for people who are in Afghanistan for whom there is not yet a pathway to leave Afghanistan.
En fait, Madame la Présidente.
Well, Madam Chair, the following point. If you say you have an objective of you want to reach that, you've promised that that's the objective that you'll be able to reach. So logically, if you have an objective of such a size, it's not it's easy, but it's very difficult to bring people out of Afghanistan right now. But if you have an objective, and we're promised that this objective would be met, logically, we would have a plan, there would be a rhythm to be able to reach this objective. And the committee doesn't have any kind of explanation with respect to this plan because nobody's given us any information. All that we want to see to help us do our work is to know what your rhythm is going to be, what the plan is, and what I've understood is that you have an objective and then you have made a promise. So that would come with a plan, I would expect, and we'd like to see it. Is that possible?
You know, it's an interesting thing because we don't develop these plans in the abstract. We deal with the uncertainties of conflict, and when you're not in control of the facts on the ground, I hesitate to promise certainty on the exact date by which people for whom there is not yet a pathway to leave Afghanistan. I believe we will be able to achieve our goal, and at the current pace of arrivals.
That's different then. That's different. Now you've changed completely. You've been telling us from the beginning that there was a promise. We were promised. It was said. The Prime Minister said it himself several times that this objective will be met in the given time, that it was promised to be met. And now what I've heard is that, well, I think that maybe we'll be able to do it. That's something quite different. So you have to be very clear with the words you use, Mr. Minister. Are you certain that you're going to be doing it? Is it a promise? It's not a problem if it isn't a promise. You just have to be clear with these people because it's not me that's going to be hurt by this. It's really the Afghans that are waiting that are going to be hurt. I understand your point. But that's not really a different story, where it's the same commitment today as what has been made before.
I'm honest with people, though. Our goal remains to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees, at least, by next year. I think we can still do that. I am confident we can still do that. But I don't want to breeze over the fact that the territory is controlled by the Taliban, and we are working to move people with partners on the ground. I believe with those partnerships we will meet our goal, and I have not wavered one iota from the very beginning of this story to today in my commitment to be successful in that goal.
Monsieur le Ministre, j'apprécie votre...
Mr. Minister, I appreciate your honesty and your response. And I think you'd have to look at the Prime Minister Trudeau's declarations during the campaign. That's a little bit different. Now, you've said it's going to be 2 weeks for travel, emergency express travel documents for Ukrainians. You said a plan was going to be set up and it's going to take 2 weeks to be able to process. So what I've heard is now it's 4 to 5 weeks. So that's twice and a half the length of time. So do you have the same numbers that I have? Because this is a concern right now.
No, that's not the same story that I've heard. Just with, again, not to put Mr. Mills on the spot, but would you like to give an update on ordinary processing times? There may be some unique exceptions, but in majority of cases. Dan, if you could provide clarity, that would be helpful.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. So yes, what we have said that in 80% of the times we're able to respect the timelines over the 14 days, and for 90% of people, what we've said is that we've assured that we want to have a complete file to be able to start processing. So that means biometrics also. And in some cases, clients and candidates have submitted their application, but they still haven't done the biometrics assessment. So it's impossible for us to go ahead with the processing of the application until that's been done.
Mr. Mills, time is up for Mr. Brunel Desatt. Maybe you will get an opportunity to come back to in the second round. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. Can the minister advise if the High Commission in Pakistan, if they're still processing applications, Afghan applications?
Sorry, just on country-specific items, I'll point to my departments because there's quite a few presences around the world. Do we have that information?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Just for clarity, though, I just want to make sure that one understands that when we're processing applications, we do process them across the globe. So it may not be that even though a person may have submitted an application in Pakistan, that it is being processed at the High Commission.
I just need an answer. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just need a clear answer. Is the High Commission in Pakistan processing Afghan applications?
I'm going to ask Mr. Mills to answer the question more directly.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Donc, oui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, there are applications that are coming through the Afghanistan High Commission.
Being processed there. I assume the answer is yes then. If it's incorrect, please submit an answer to the committee for clarification.
The information is correct.
Is the minister still exercising his authority to bring in special procedures secretly for Afghans?
I'm not sure what special secret procedures you're speaking about.
Well, actually, I have an undertaking with respect to that, and I asked that question in the previous committee meeting, and the response is that the minister will engage in the practice to which he engages, to which he cannot disclose. So, can the minister advise if he's still engaging in special procedures within the department that's not in the public, not for the public consumption?
There are some policies that I believe have not been published. For more specific policies, I would be interested in sort of more specificity in what you're looking for.
Well, maybe I can follow up with the minister then with respect to that in another meeting, if the minister can.
Sure. And to be clear, the kinds of things we're talking about are typically to protect people's safety and security, not for some ulterior purpose.
Let's hope so. The minister has said on the public record that on the issue of security checks, it's not up to him. The Department of National Defense told members at the Afghanistan Committee that no one has asked them to work with allied countries to help bring Afghans to safety or help with the collection of biometrics in third countries. Why hasn't the minister asked for assistance from other department officials in this regard, and most particularly with the military?
Because Global Affairs Canada is responsible for our diplomatic relations with other countries, and we work closely with them for the very kind of thing that you've described.
Has the minister asked Global Affairs to ask the Department of National Defense for assistance?
To ask them for assistance in asking third countries for help with biometrics processing? I'm just unclear what the question is.
To help work with allied countries to bring Afghans to safety and to help with the collection of biometrics.
I don't know if Global Affairs has asked the Department of National Defense.
No, sorry. My question was, has the minister asked Global Affairs to make that request to the Department of National Defense?
We don't need the Department of National Defense to be part of that. We deal with third countries all the time for the purpose of things like biometrics collection and other matters, and those conversations are happening with different countries around the world. It may just be that the Department of National Defense is not the appropriate department to be having those conversations. But access to biometrics in third countries is not a bottleneck right now. Safe passage through Afghanistan to get to those third countries is very much a challenge.
Well, I can tell the minister that there are a lot of Afghan families who could not get their biometrics done as the reason why they cannot get through to the next steps with their processing of applications. And the issue for a lot of those Afghans, it is about biometrics. The Department of National Defense, for the minister's information, to which I'm sure he is aware, previously that they have actually engaged in similar missions in different regions in helping a government of a whole approach to bring people to safety, including addressing the issues of security and biometrics. And so I would urge the minister to consider that and ask GAC to approach the Department of National Defense for assistance. They have the capacity and the capability to do that work. I'd like to...
There's just, I think there's a lot we agree on. I think on this point, I think there's a breakdown in maybe I'm not articulating myself very well. Yes, when we collect biometrics information from a person, we can use the Department of National Defense's database. We don't need to send a mission to the third countries we're dealing with to meet the volumes of people who we can process biometrics for once they get to a third country. If we're talking about extracting people from Afghanistan, that is a different issue altogether. Biometrics in the country in Afghanistan are a real challenge, but biometrics in third countries for people who've made it out is not something that we need to engage the Department of National Defense to successfully process people for biometrics in those third countries.
Maybe the minister should think about then the option of engaging the military and asking them for help to bring people out of Afghanistan as well. And that, too, I would think that both measures are critically important, Minister. I'd like to ask the Minister if he can table for this committee a breakdown of the people that has arrived here to Canada and those that have actually been in the third country prior to the fall of Kabul, because I think it's important to get that information to distinguish which are the people that were previously in need of getting to safety versus the people that is in need of getting safety as a result of the fall of Kabul in August.
Sure. Dan or Jennifer, do either of you have that information with you right now?
Time is up for Ms. Kwan.
Okay, well, we can follow up.
Yeah, like if that request can be looked into. We will now proceed to Mr. Redekop. Mr. Redekop, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, in your letter that opens the 22-23 departmental plan, you write about permanent residents, and you talk about the targets of between 360 and 445,000 new residents. But then when you look on page 22, we can see the results from the prior years, and they're always below. And in the last year, you said that you've achieved that 401,000, I think you said. So the backlog that I've seen sits at 2.1 million people, and that I think includes new citizens. You've put some extra money in for that. But my question for you is, 400,000 a year, the backlog's 2 million plus. That's 5 years of processing, assuming no new people come. How do you explain that?
Okay, there's quite a few things going on that I think requires to highlight, and I saw Dan, you may want to jump in as well. The numbers you're talking about, I assume, include all different lines of business, not permanent residency. One of the other things that is really important is that includes people who applied yesterday. It's normal for us to have hundreds of thousands of cases in any given year come into our system. In fact, we plan on resettling 405,000, or we resettled 405,000 last year, 432,000 this year. If I look at international students, we might have 500,000 applications come in a given year. And that's actually a healthy sign that demonstrates people want to come to Canada. Where we run into challenges is when the number of people who are applying each year is greater than the processing capacity of the department. With the investments that we made, I'm actually quite confident the vast majority of our lines of business will be back to about the service standard by the end of the year. If you want more specific details, I'm sure Mr. Mills would be happy to provide them, but if you'd like to move on with your questions, we'd be happy to follow up if you want to submit something in writing.
Let's move on to Ukrainian backlogs. You came and touted the program bringing Ukrainians fleeing the war zone, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and I don't know if you have the information, great, and if not, you can provide it to the committee in days. How many Ukrainians have applied under this program?
A little bit more than 200,000. I haven't seen the update today, but we're in that order of magnitude.
And how many have been accepted or rejected or processed?
A little more than 100,000, I believe, over the last couple of days we crossed that milestone.
And how many have made it to Canada?
So far, I don't, under that particular program, it's unclear to me, but because I just don't have the figure in front of me, there's been more than 25,000 since the beginning of the year. That includes people who may have come under a different stream. I want to add a little bit of detail from the trip that when we went to the region with Mr. Hallen last week. One of the things that we're seeing is a lot of people are taking an application out of the program for peace of mind and as an insurance policy. Belgium, in fact, has expected and prepared for 200,000. Only 30,000 have shown up. And the people are largely speaking wanting to stay as close to Ukraine as possible. And those who have left are showing a real reticence to even move away from transportation hubs. So I don't expect that everyone who becomes entitled to come to Canada will actually come to Canada. So we may continue to see a delta between the number who are here under this program and the number who've been approved.
Okay, fair enough. So part of the reason I ask these questions is because the backlog has grown substantially. It's increased by, I think we're up to 2.1 million, this same backlog we were speaking of before. And so I'm just curious if that's driven by the Ukrainian program, or what are the factors that are driving that explosion of 200,000 or 300,000 people just in the last few months?
So I want to be careful because those are your numbers, not mine. I assume that includes all of the people who've just applied to the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel. And we've now seen 200,000 people apply for the program in a matter of a month and a half. When you have that kind of a new program with those kinds of volumes, that adds to the total number of pending applications, again, which I hesitate to describe as a backlog because it's normal to have an inventory of cases. But a far more important measuring stick to me is how long it takes to get through these cases, not how many there are. If we have large numbers of people who want to come to Canada, I think that's a good thing. But the difference between the number of people who want to come and our ability to process them is a very important metric.
Yeah, and I think the point is that that wasn't going to increase the backlog, but it seems like it has. So that's a concern that we have. I just want to end quickly on hashtag SDS, which it has become SDS for Bangladesh. It has become a hashtag. Last week I heard that the department is actually working on this. Can you give us an update on the timing, how long it's likely to take for this to get processed?
Look, I don't have it in front of mind. I think we've actually seen a pretty significant increase in the approval rate from Bangladesh this year compared to, or 2021 compared to 2020. But I don't know if our officials have just the update that Mr. Redekop's looking for.
Thank you for the question. So as was shared previously, we have been doing work with the High Commissioner for Bangladesh, and we are doing finalizing the internal evaluation of the SDS. And we're expecting and hoping for it to be completed by fall 2022 in order to be able to proceed to have the program live. But we are in the process of finalizing that evaluation as we speak.
We will now proceed to Mr. El-Khoury for 5 minutes. Mr. El-Khoury, you can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Mr. Minister. It's a great pleasure to be able to have an exchange with you. My question, knowing that IRCC has more than a dozen projects underway with respect to equity and equality, can you give us some details with respect to these projects?
Sure. There's an awful lot of work going on. I think one of the things that's really important for me to reflect on is that we have to be honest in government about what we do well and areas where we need to improve. And I think in every organization, the size of our department and across government, we need to constantly be pursuing equity and fairness and anti-discrimination initiatives. It'll come as no secret to members of this committee that we conducted a survey in the wake of the murder of George Floyd to understand what kind of discriminatory behaviors exist within our own shop. That sort of inward reflection is really important. And the lessons that we learned were not happy stories. We had some real challenges. I've been pleased with the response of the department. That doesn't mean everything's fixed. There are still some real challenges. And by the way, these challenges interfere with the ability of organizations to meet their full potential when you don't have a welcoming workspace in some instances. It makes it harder to recruit the best and brightest who might not see themselves in an organization. The kinds of initiatives focus both on the policies that impact people that we serve and that impact the people that we work with. In terms of the people that we work with, there's initiatives to bring more people into leadership positions within the department, to increase the representation of different demographic groups through all levels of the organization, making sure people have a safe and private place to raise concerns where there will not be fears of reprisals for sharing examples of unsavory behavior on the part of their superiors. In terms of the policies that have an outward impact, we're constantly looking about differential outcomes, and I'm actually very much looking forward to looking at all of the recommendations of this committee on that particular study. And these are the kinds of things that actually lead us to saying, hey, can we be doing more to support people in regions of Africa, like Francophone newcomers, and a new office we're looking at in Cameroon is going to help with that kind of initiative. And constantly looking at both the internal and external impact of our policies is something that's necessary. It's in our interest as a department. It's in the interest of Canadians. Would be happy to provide more information on the back end of this meeting if you want it to nail down more specifically what you think is useful.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Minister. Deuxième question.
My second question, if it would be possible, Mr. Minister, could you give us some details with respect to a working group that was set up in July 2020 and that was to work full-time to be able to provide to the ministry department a strategic orientation on personnel management policies and program delivery?
Look, on the specifics of the policy, I think the group that we have responsible for it are with us here today. Perhaps I'll let them take the floor to walk folks through the details.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. As it was said, yes, from 2020, we set up a working group, a full-time group that is working closely with all of the different sectors of the department to ensure that all sectors have set up objectives that have to be met linked to the strategy. And the strategy has a stream that deals with what happens internally within the department with respect to the employees. And there are very concrete objectives that we want to ensure, as well as for the service delivery. There are colleagues that are looking at the policies side and how our programs are designated. We also have a stream that looks at data, and we want to ensure that all of the objectives that we're looking towards meet and are met. And I would like to also add that we want to ensure that all of our managers are aware of the existence of this strategy, and to be able to ensure, we even have a paragraph in the letter when they come to the department so that they will understand the importance of meeting this strategy and how important it is to the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Xavier. Time is up for Mr. Al-Khouri. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep for 2.5 minutes, and then we will end this panel with Ms. Kwan, and Nikki. After that, we'll end this meeting. Mr. Brunel Desep.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will be the last time I speak, so I'd like to thank the Minister for coming today and to answer honestly to the questions. And you said that you don't have the exact numbers as to how many people have come into Canada for the Ukrainians, the express travel. Maybe the officials could let us know what the numbers are. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. As the Minister has said, over 23,000 people have come in since the 1st of January this year, and we're not able to say whether or not they came with this new program that the minister has announced on the 17th of March. That's the information that we can't give you right away. The number does exist. So I think the problem is with CBSA.
The Canada Border Services Agency.
Okay.
So, okay, they track how people enter and how they come in. So it may just be that we don't have that particular figure. I'm sure we can find that number and deliver it to the committee.
Ça serait gentil de...
Well, that would be great to send it to the committee, because there are a lot of people that came in January who already had travel authorization. So when you say that 23,000 came, we don't know how many came with the special authorization. But so I just have a limited amount of time, but quickly, I would like to say there are a lot of witnesses each time that we have done studies within the committee, whether it's for foreign students, whether it's for the study on racisms and on backlogs. You say things are too opaque and there's a lack of transparency. You have been very transparent with us. So do you think those witnesses are wrong when they say that it's opaque?
No, I think we can always improve to be more transparent. And look, you've got a department of 11,000 people that serves more clients than most of the rest of the government put together. And we're growing at a pace that is extraordinary in the last few years. The kinds of things that we're trying to do, I mentioned earlier, we're broadcasting actual expected times for processing rather than just service standard times. The ability of people to access information about their case is something we've now made possible with trackers for permanent residency and family reunification and citizenship. We'll keep doing more with that sort of thing. And this numbers issue with ISFC is just a function that we don't have that number right here today, but we can get that, and we're happy to broadcast it.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. Time is up, Mr. Brunel de Sep. Time is up for Mr. Brunel de Sep. We will have to proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. I wonder if the minister can provide to the committee this information, a gender analysis of the Afghans that have arrived, so a breakdown of women versus men that have arrived to date. And then also, if I could get the minister to table for the committee the projected timelines of when the backlog for each of the stream will be for those applications will be processed, so that and to also identify how many and where the application, where the processing is essentially complete and is just waiting for the immigration levels numbers to finalize those applications. And further to that, I'm interested in getting the particular breakdowns for the caregivers component. My understanding is that for the Caring for Children program, the home child care provider pilot, the home support worker program, the interim pathway, the living caregivers program, and the high medical needs program. In total, there are 47,087 applications in the backlog. So if the minister can advise and table to the committee the information on how long does he project that IRCC will process all of these applications, and how many of those applications are waiting for levels numbers to finalized, for the application to be finalized. And then finally, last piece, because I only have 2.5 minutes, so I have to get all this in. On the extended family members of former Afghan interpreters, literally at 12:12 today, I got the undertaking that I asked for from officials back in March 3rd, and it indicates that 980 applications are in active processing under this stream. 0 have been approved, 0 pending approval, and 0 have arrived in Canada. So could the minister advise when can the extended family members of the former Afghan interpreters would arrive here in Canada and for the applications to be processed? There are 300 former Afghans who submitted their applications, and 65% of them have not even received a G number. The other ones with the G numbers have not had their application processed. So this is of grave urgency. And the last question for the minister is, for the Ukraine extended family application process, when can people get the details of that, and when will it actually come in play to be active in terms of processing?
Madam Chair, how much time do I have?
It's like 1 minute.
Okay. So I'll need to review the transcript just because you had some pretty clear asks after the meeting is over. Just a word on extended families. This is a group that we made a special pathway for because we want to help. I am starting to see movement on a lot of these files. There's been hundreds of people who've now been approved for eligibility, hundreds more who've been through both eligibility and security. Internally, it looks like there's a lot of movement. I don't have a specific date, and until I have one, I told the family, the interpreters who want to bring their extended families here, that when I have a date, I'm going to let them know, and I'll let this committee know when we expect to have those dates when it's nailed down. I don't want to create expectations on a particular date until I know with certainty, and I think out of fairness to them, I'd like to do that. On Ukraine, I don't expect the details will take us that long, but in the overarching point for me is my priority right now is to make sure we provide safe haven to people who need it now. People who come under the temporary program will be able to apply for the new family sponsorship when it's set up. Again,
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. We will have quick 2.5 minutes for Mr. Benson, and then end that with Mr. Ali for 2.5 minutes. So then minister can leave. So 2.5 minutes for Mr. Benson. Mr. Benson, you can please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and thank you all witnesses that are here today. My two quick things, Minister. You said in the first hour that we're still basically a paper-based department. And if we're going to get these backlogs reduced and increase our processing time, we really need to get into more of a highly digital, highly virtual environment. You said you had a plan. My first question is simply, can you give us that plan? Can you provide it to us in writing, what your timeline is, your costs are, the benchmarks, and how it'll work, so we can see how that will improve in the future? And the second part is really a quick question. I have some constituents who are applying for their TRVs, and they're waiting, I think, an excessive amount of time for their security checks. They're waiting 7, 8, 9, 10 months to get their security checks back. I understand we're outsourcing those, and that may be part of the problem. Can we do these ourselves or be part of that process? And even if we're outsourcing them, can we reduce them and have a timeline that says, we need to get these things back in 90 days or something much shorter than these, almost a year taking that long to get to? Thank you.
Thank you. So look, I've got a really limited amount of time to answer, so I'll try to cut to the chase. Happy to look at the summary of the digitization space. There's been a couple milestones that have already been implemented, and this is something I'm really excited about. This is a $827 million investment, and progress is chugging along. It will transform immigration in Canada and make an enormous difference, and I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to be the person implementing the system. On the security checks, it's the reason that typically happens is because we can't do it on our own and rely on information that's being provided by another country, for example. And that is a real big challenge because we're sometimes at the mercy of the ability of another country to provide information to us. So it can vary enormously on a case-by-case basis. And I just hesitate to say without knowing about the specific cases you're referring to, whether that's something we could improve upon or whether it's actually a third party that we're relying on. And look, we don't have time to get into it today. I would love to speak more about the digitization should we have the opportunity.
Can you provide us with your outline?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you just provide us with your plan? Can you send us?
I can provide a summary to the committee of our plan with as much detail as I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. We will now have Mr. Ali and for 2.5 minutes, and then we will end the panel. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Honorable Minister, thank you again for your patience and hard work. I have two questions, and then you can answer. I'm going to throw those questions together. First one is regarding citizenship ceremonies. Your department has been very successful in adapting the citizenship process to the challenge of the pandemic. Applications for citizenship can be done online. An average of 5,000 people a week are invited to take the citizenship test online. And as of February 15th, 133,000 people have become Canadian citizens through virtual ceremonies. Can you update us on the plans for continuing this progress? This is question one. And second, could you please update the committee of the current TRV application processing time for the applicants from Pakistan? Thank you, Minister.
Sure. So you want to build upon Mr. Benson's question. If you want to see the power of digital processes, let's look at the experience with citizenship. It really was pounded in the early days of the pandemic when we couldn't have people gather in large spaces to have hundreds of people swear their oath at one particular time. Through the combination of digital application process and virtual ceremonies, we're able to really process an extraordinary number of people. And Mr. Mills, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in the month of March, we had 41,000 new Canadian citizens take their oath of citizenship. This is an extraordinary increase in volume and capacity of the system made possible with the adoption of technology. On the TRV issue, with respect to Pakistan, I don't have the number in front of me. I could dig it out of this big binder, but I think our team can do it faster than I can. Dan, have you got that particular number specific to to Pakistan?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The processing time for a TRV is 90 days roughly. That includes all of the inventory before and after the 7th of September.
Thank you, Minister. Through Madam Chair again. I understand that your department processed more than 100,000 work permit applications in the first quarter of 2022. Can you update us on the work permits processing since then?
So just to put it in perspective, and again, just because I won't dig it out, I'll point to Mr. Mills. I think we're at about double the pace of last year in terms of our actual production capacity when it comes to work permits. But Dan, do you have the updates since the end of March? I think that was the question, Mr. Ali.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah. Time is up. Maybe if possible.
Okay, we'll happily provide it after the meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And with that, this panel comes to an end. I need 5 minutes from the members after the minister leaves to have some direction on the calendar for the next week. But I want to take this opportunity on behalf of all the members of this committee to thank the minister for appearing before the committee and for all the work which you are doing. I know it's a very difficult file. And officials, of course, yes. So it's a very difficult file, and what all is going around the world, your job becomes even more challenging. So big thank you to you, Minister, and to all the officials who are working long hours to make sure that we can clear those backlogs which have been created during the COVID. So thank you, Minister. We need 5 minutes from the members. So we will allow the Minister to leave and then have quick 5 minutes with the members. For the next week. So for Tuesday, we must complete the report consideration of the recruitment report. So I think if we can schedule Mr. Seaback to appear on C242 for the first hour, and then we can move into the report consideration so that we can finalize that report and table it. And then I need some time on Tuesday, once we complete the draft report, to go through committee business to discuss the letter which was requested by the members in the last meeting in regards to the legal opinion from the law clerk, so that the members should have by Monday, if everything goes well and translation can happen, so we can discuss that on Tuesday. In regards to Bill C-242, we need some deadlines in regards to the amendments. Mr. Seaback can appear on Tuesday for 1 hour, and then we can have the second hour as the consideration of draft report, and then we can go into the meetings 4 panels with the witnesses, 1 panel with the officials. So that will be 3 meetings total, including Mr. Seaback's, and then we have 1 clause by clause. So for the clause by clause, we need a deadline for the amendments. So does the committee agree that the deadlines for the amendments be set for May 26 at noon? It will be a break week, but members can, because the clerk will have to give a deadline to all the members to submit their amendments before we go clause by clause for May 26 noon. Ms. Kwan?
Yeah, I just want to just ask a couple of questions. So I think I caught 4 hours for Mr. Seaback's bill.
No, sorry to correct you. 1 hour with Mr. Seaback to present his bill to the members.
Yeah.
1 hour with the officials, and then 4 panels, 4 hours with the witnesses. So we will go through 12 witnesses, and the breakdown of the based on each party will be Liberal 6, Conservatives 4, Bloc 1, NDP 1. No, 4 panels. 2 meetings, yes.
They can discuss that on Tuesday.
For 2 hours?
4 panels, 4 hours.
4 hours.
4 hours. 1 panel will be for an hour.
Wow.
4 panels, 1 hour each, and we will go through 12 witnesses.
Okay. It's a lot, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering, I talked to Mr. Seaback previously, and he was okay with the idea for him to appear for his hour along with officials, which will then save us 1 hour, if that could be accommodated. That was something that he said to me that he was fine with. And then with respect to witnesses, 4 hours, that's two full meetings, right? And I wonder whether or not there's a way for us to work collaboratively. We may well have duplication of witnesses to see if we can actually reduce that time. The only reason why I'm saying this is that I'm really worried about us running out of time. We're still trying to finish that first report in terms of completion of the report. We have finished the witnesses and waiting to do the other report on differential treatment. And then we've started our study on delays in processing. I'm just really, I would really like for us to get through these 3 studies, if we can, Madam Chair, and then we have other items that needs to come before the committee as well. So if we can try and find a way to save some time is what I'm trying to achieve.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan, for your input. We have Mr. Ali and then Mr. Brunel to say, but just to clarify for the members, we can have more discussion because we have a hard stop at 1:10. We can have some more discussion on Tuesday on this, but just want to clarify for all members, this PNB, any legislation is always a priority, and I want to proceed so that we can finish this clause by clause before we rise for the summer break, and hopefully, I am very hopeful that we can finalize the report on the acceptance rate on Tuesday, and we would be able to table that. The study on the processing time, I don't think so. We would be able to complete it before we rise for June. And we have put in a proposal for a visit in regards to the study for the processing time. So that will, we will continue that when we come back in September. In regards to tabling the report for the, that's the differential outcomes. We will see how quick we go, like it's up to the members. Once we have the draft report, if we can finish it before we rise for the summer break or not. So quickly from Mr. Ali, Mr. Brunel Desep, and Mr. Helen, and then we have a hard stop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wouldn't take too long. I just wanted to move a motion on that MP Randeep Sarai's motion was supported unanimously. I just wanted to move a motion that if that could be studied in CIMM, that motion. Thank you.
Mr. Ali, are you giving a notice? Because you have not given a notice. Are you just moving it or you are giving a notice?
I wanted to move a motion.
Yeah, you have to, you can move a motion if you have already given a 48-hour notice. So,
okay, so that consider as a notice, please.
Yeah, so if you can send it in both official languages to the clerk of the committee. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brunel Desep, and then Mr. Helen.
Okay, très rapidement pour
Very quickly, for C-242, what I would propose, the 3 meetings, that's a lot. What I would propose, Madame Jenny has said that CBAC was ready to share with the officials, and what I would propose is 2 one-hour panels, maximum. I'm telling you, we won't have any witnesses. So if you want to fill some space, well, I think we'll save some time. So 2 panels of 1 hour length, I think that would be perfect with the study. That way, we would have an extra hour where we could use in Canada for drafting the report.
Personally, 6, just hearing from, on a legislation, hearing from just from the 6 witnesses will not give us, a good idea, to go into clause by clause. My recommendation would be that, members can have discussions among themselves, and then we can finalize that on Tuesday. But if the members agree that, Mr. Seaback and the officials can do in 1 hour, then I can ask the clerk to find out, to work with Mr. Seaback and the officials to see if we can accommodate both of them for 1 hour on Tuesday. And then in committee business, members can have discussions among themselves, and then we can come back and make a final decision on Tuesday. But, okay, thank you. Is the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes, the meeting is adjourned.